Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for How to Design a Pitch Deck 101 with Yasmin Mistry. My name is Tahiat Mahboob. I'm an organizer on the education team at the Video Consortium. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a South Asian woman with long black hair and light brown skin. I'm wearing a black top, and I'm sitting in front of a blue background with the Video Consortium logo. I'm joining you from Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. If you're new to Video Consortium, we are a global nonprofit media organization that connects and supports today's nonfiction filmmakers and video journalists to tell bold stories that change the world. Our programs help democratize the media landscape by fostering compassionate storytelling, supporting professional and artistic growth, and inspiring audiences everywhere. To quickly give you a lay of the land, during this workshop, we'll share an overview of how to design pitch decks. We'll play a trailer for a documentary. We'll go over the pitch deck for that documentary and some one-sheets, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our stellar guest for the evening, Yasmin Mistry. I'm going to give you a brief highlight of who she is, and I'll drop her full bio in the link. So Yasmin is an Emmy-nominated animator and filmmaker. Her films have screened at over 140 film festivals, and they have been nominated for more than 80 awards. Her work has been displayed worldwide, including showings at the United Nations and White House, as well as film festivals such as South by Southwest, Tribeca, and DOC NYC. She's also the founder of the Foster Care Film and Community Engagement Project, which uses film and animation to give youth in foster care a platform through which to be heard. Thank you, Yasmin, for joining us today. I'm so excited. Please take it away.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Yeah, and just to give the description, I'm a South Asian woman with black hair, wearing a white top, and with the same blue background. And I'm tuning in from Brooklyn. I live in the Lenape land. And I'm really excited to be looking in the chat and seeing people from all over the world here. So thank you for being here. So with that, I think we'll just get started. Let me share my screen and we can get going. I will just be going over like a little PowerPoint where we'll talk a lot about pitch decks and as well as one sheets. And then after that, I'm going to walk you through some of my own examples of work that I've done so that you can kind of see what these would look like in practice. So I guess first thing, what is a pitch deck? Really, a pitch deck is a chance for you to use writing and visuals to just give a roadmap for your film. Your film might be in the early stages, you might just be in development, you might be much further along, and depending on where you're at in the process, that is going to impact, what your deck looks like and what you're going to be able to share. But the main thing you want with your pitch deck is for somebody to take a look at it really quickly and to be able to get an idea of what your film is about, what your film will look like. And again, this may change. If you're starting off in development, what your film is going to look like, a year or two from now is not necessarily going to be the same thing. So I do think of a pitch deck as something that is constantly evolving. The other thing is one sheets. A lot of people they don't want to look at something that's like 20 pages. They want something really quick, particularly if you might be going for like corporations and people who are really busy. So a pitch deck might be something that's like 20 pages long, whereas a one sheet is going to be what it's called. It's going to be one sheet. If it were printed, a one sheet might be front and back. So technically in like a PDF, it might be two sheets. But the idea of a one sheet is it's really quick. It's getting across who, what, when, where, why. It's telling you, why this film, why now, why you. Probably a lot of the questions that you're answering in your grant applications, but you're doing it in a much more concise way. I think a big thing with one sheets is that because you're trying to be so concise, you really want you want it to pop out. So if you can use quotes, something that kind of says somebody else is, giving a thumbs up to this project, somebody might have written a review about your project if you're at that stage. And that's like a great way to really show that you have backing behind your project. One sheets can be done in the distribution phase, but it can also be done much earlier on. Obviously, if it's much earlier on, it's much harder to get a quote, but there are definitely ways to do it, and I'll show you when I show you some of my own one sheets. But some of these ways could include, maybe talking to your film participants, and somebody might have a quote saying how much the project means to them and why they're participating. It might be that you are planning on doing a big impact campaign, years down the road when your film is finished, but you already have some potential partner organizations and people that are interested in your film. So you could reach out to them and you could ask them, to get a quote, or you could just ask them why they're interested in the film and why they want to see it made, and then ask if you can use that as a quote. So those are some of the things you want to include. And then kind of the obvious things are the working title, the log line, a short synopsis. Obviously, this is a lot to put into 1 to 2 pages. And then, of course, your call to action. Where you're at in terms of making the film is going to depend on what your call to action is. It might be that you're looking for funding and you have a crowdfunding link. It might be that you're looking for sponsorship for an impact campaign. It might be you just want people to watch your trailer because you want them to be interested in the film and maybe come on as a crew member or as an executive producer. So really, you want to just put in links that are relevant to where you're at in the project and what your ask is. And again, this is something that is probably going to change over the lifetime of your project. And all of these elements that I'm telling you are going to vary depending on your particular project and where you are in the development or production stage. I kind of already talked about this, but the length of a deck, I usually recommend 10 to 20 pages. People often write a lot more than ends up being that can fit in 10 to 20 pages. So it's often a back and forth process of, taking your materials, particularly if you've written longer materials for grants and are sort of whittling it down. But I recommend 10 to 20 pages for a feature length documentary, 15 to 25 pages for a series. And we'll kind of get into what the differences shortly, but a series will include some information about the different episodes. And so that's why it will tend to be a little bit longer. These are just guidelines. I have worked on films that wanted 30, 35 pages. I've never worked on films that have wanted like a 60-page one, but I've certainly talked to people who have them. I don't recommend it just because people are very busy and they're going to want to look through something very quickly. But these guidelines are, again, based on your project and what the needs are for your particular film. So these are just guidelines.
What about the length for short documentaries? The length.
So I would probably say you want to be in that 10 to 20 page range, but probably on the shorter side of it, 10 pages. But still, we're going to get into it, I think, on the next slide about what you want to put in a deck. And you still have the same elements, whether it's a short or a feature. So it is still going to be in that 10 to 20 page range. You might be able to just cut it down a little bit. Your crew might not be as big, your synopsis might not be as complicated. So you might be able to keep things down to 1 page where certain sections might take 2 pages in when you're doing it for a feature. I know some people, I think ahead of time, had been asking some questions about how to make a deck and what tools to use. I mainly use Adobe Creative Cloud, so it's going to be InDesign along with supportive work in Photoshop and Illustrator. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, I know Canva is a really popular tool on PowerPoint, Google Slides, Keynote. I'm not as familiar with those, so I wouldn't be able to answer too many questions about those tools, but I tend to use Adobe InDesign. But I know there's a lot of free tools out there these days. So kind of talking a little bit about, when you're making your deck, what you want to put in the deck, but some kind of basic design rules, I'd say, are you want it to have a lot of breathing room. You want it to be something that people will look at. If they want to look at it quickly, it'll be something that they can kind of just skim through and maybe they stop if something grabs their attention. I know if people send me a deck and it's just blocks and blocks and blocks of text, it's not very inviting to want to read that text. So I tend to just not read it. So you want to make it really inviting. You want to make it small, short blocks of text that people can kind of skim. They can see what interests them. You want to have big, bold headlines. So, maybe if somebody is, looking for a project that they can support that's coming out in 2024, then if you have, a page that says like project timeline, they can go to that and immediately say, oh, this project fits what I'm looking for. Now I'm going to go back and look in, more details. So you want it to be whatever people are looking for. They can easily find that information, and then hopefully they will go in and do a deep dive and look at your deck in depth. But don't expect people to. So you want to keep it as simple and as clean as possible. I'd say a big thing you also want to do is use this deck to really show what your film is going to look like. If your film has, I don't know, a lot of archival material and you present something that's super modern, there's going to be this disconnect. If you are at a point where you have a trailer or a work sample or a scene select edited, and you're going to be sending that with a deck or after you send a deck, you want to make sure those two things are working together and that they're sort of balancing each other out. And somebody's not looking at your deck and seeing one project and then looking at your scene select and seeing a completely different project. So you really want to make sure you're using engaging visuals, but in visuals that actually match what you intend the film to look like. And again, this could change. So again, your deck is probably going to be a work in progress. Besides from that, I would say if you have any branding, if you are at a point where you've already designed some elements, maybe you're already using some fonts in your, in your trailer, maybe you are doing something that's for a brand, and the company has, a visual style already. You want to make sure you're incorporating that stuff so you're getting a nice, consistent look. And that may or may not apply depending on, if you have anything already developed. And I think we've kind of already covered most of this stuff where it's just going to be clean, concise, really taking into account readability. Again, you want to make sure that people are looking at things and getting information quickly. And then before we get into all kind of the details of what's going to go into it, keep in mind who you're planning on sending this deck to. I think that's really important because one, I know a lot of people want to protect their deck. They want to make sure, no one's going to steal their idea, which is very valid. But there are different ways to protect your deck. It could be something as simple as, putting a copyright notice at the end, to more extreme as like having somebody sign an NDA before taking a look at it. I say to keep in mind who you're going to be sending this out to because, for example, if you're sending this out to a big production company, they're not going to probably sign an NDA in order to look at your deck. In fact, it's probably going to be the reverse. I know when I've sent my own decks to production companies, it has definitely been the reverse. They have actually asked me to sign a submission waiver where I'm signing something saying if they make something similar, I can't sue them. So definitely keep in mind, who you are pitching this to, and that may determine how you want to protect your deck if you do want to put anything in there. Also keep in mind that if you are sending it out to like big production companies, you're probably going to start with somebody kind of the gatekeeper, and these decks are going to have to get forwarded. Hopefully people will be interested and the deck will get forwarded to the right person. But if you're making it super hard to access, then it may just be a barrier. So you want to kind of find the balance between protecting your idea and also making it accessible to the right people. And with that in mind, I would say make sure when you do send your deck, you are sending it as a PDF. I have had people send me decks as like Word documents or even Canva files. The problem with that is, well, several things. One is that they can be really large. Two is that those fonts that you're using, I might not have on my computer. And if I don't have that font on my computer, then what's happening is my computer is going to put in some other placeholder font and everything gets out of line and out of whack. And then it doesn't look like the nice design that you set up. So just make sure that before you send anything out to people, you have packaged it as a PDF. If you're using Adobe Acrobat, there's a place where you can do reduce file size. Make sure you are reducing the file size so it's something small and that it can just be emailed. Or if you're not and it's a pretty big file, then maybe put it on a Google Drive or put it on some sort of accessible link so that you make sure that that file gets through to the right people. So I guess now what I want to get into is just what actually goes into a deck. As I mentioned before, the content of a deck is going to very much vary depending on what stage you're at. So this is kind of an overview, and it's not necessarily that you need to put every single one of these items in. It will very much depend on your project, but these are things that I recommend. So I would first start with obviously a cover page with your film's title. A big thing that I think a lot of people forget is to say what the film is. So is it a short? Is it a feature? Is it a series? Just letting people know so that when they're looking at the deck, they have this idea of what it is before they jump into it. Next, you would want a page that has your log line. So something just really quick and short that people can kind of see, if this is something they're interested in. If they are interested, hopefully they will read your synopsis. For a feature film, I would say you can just have one, maybe 2 pages with a more detailed synopsis. If you are working on a series, this is where I think you can expand the deck. Let's say you're working on maybe a series, it's a limited series, it's got 4 episodes. You would have one page that says the series overview, and it maybe would tell you it's 4 episodes. Each episode is going to be a certain length, and this is kind of the overview of what this series is about. Then I would go into breaking down each episode and having 4 different pages, one for each episode, where you say what, maybe each episode is highlighting a different person, a different location, a different story. So you would have a quick synopsis about each of those different episodes. If you are doing like a web series with 20 episodes, do not put 20 pages in. Pick some of your best episodes, the ones you're maybe starting with, the ones you really want to highlight. If you have a celebrity or something in one that would help in a pitch deck, use those. But pick a few episodes to highlight so that the people who are looking at your deck have an idea of what the episodes will be, but don't put in like 20 pages. So then after you have that, the next thing I would say would be to put in your film participants. If you have a series and each episode is maybe highlighting a different person, then you've sort of already done this, so you don't need to make this a separate page. If you have a feature or a short film, I would recommend putting in a page with your film participants. Then how many pages this would be would really just depend on how many participants you have, who are truly the main people that need to be highlighted in this deck. If you have a lot of people, you might want one page for main participants and another one for supporting characters. If you don't have too many people, I would say keep this to one page and try to just keep it short and sweet. The next thing I would recommend is your artistic approach. Now, hopefully, if you've created this deck, in a really great way, people will know what your artistic approach is just by looking at the deck. But obviously, depending on what stage you're at, you may not have the materials to do that yet. So let's say your film is a mix of animation and archival and live action, and voiceover and interviews, whatever it may be. You need to put all of that information in here so that people have an idea of what your film will actually look like when it's actually put together. You might not be in that stage where you have a lot of information for this, particularly if you're in the early stages. If that's the case, I would recommend trying to do comparables. For my film, which you'll see the deck for shortly, I always say the storyline is a mix of 3 identical strangers meets daughter from Danae. So that would be an example of comparables. Now, our visual style is really, really different, and I don't really have good comparables for it. So, only put in comparables if you have something that is strong. It is a comparable that works with your particular film, and also that it's a comparable that people will know. I feel like it can be a lot harder if you're referencing films that most people don't know. Certainly, people can Google them, so it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does help if you say 2 films that people know, then they immediately get an image in their mind of what your film looks like, and that can really be helpful. The next thing I'd say is a work sample or trailer. Typically, I'd say a trailer because it's shorter. In our deck, we actually do have a work sample, and I'll get into why a little bit later. You may not have a work sample or trailer at this point, so don't feel like you absolutely have to put one in. Your work sample or trailer may be a work in progress, and if you don't feel like it's strong enough, don't put it in. When you're making a pitch deck, you really want to put your best foot forward. You want this deck to basically continue the conversation with somebody, so you really want to only put in things that you feel are really strong. Some other things that I would recommend including if you are at the stage where you have this information, one is target audience. Obviously, we want everybody to see our films, and you might have a wide audience, but you really want to say who your niche audience is, who you're really trying to target, not just for watching the film, but if you're planning on having an impact campaign way down the line when your film is finished, who would you be targeting with that? What would this potential impact be? How would you be targeting people with impact? Are you planning on sending this out to universities and schools? Are you planning on doing conferences? Just who are you really targeting, and why and how? And audience and impact might be two different pages if you're at the stage where these are really developed. They don't necessarily have to be. If you're at an early stage, maybe audience, impact, distribution plan, maybe all of those things are combined into one. But I think you want to have some of this information out there just to let people know that you're thinking about this. Certainly anybody who is coming on as an investor is going to want to know, who this film is like directed towards, why they're going to care about it, and how they're going to see it. So with that in mind, I would say distribution plan might include, educational, like we've talked about, and impact, but also, do you want to do domestic release? Do you want to do international? Do you want to try and get a theatrical release? Is your film for streamers like Netflix and Hulu, or is it more for public broadcast? Or, what, maybe it's a web series that's going on YouTube. So just showing that you thought about all of these things, I think really, really helps.
Just a quick question. I just want to throw two questions to you from the chat. Someone, I know this is going to come up when you present your own deck, but someone also wanted to know more about participants and how you're going to highlight them and what part in the deck. So I know you're going to show that, but I just want to flag that to you. And I also want to let you know, someone wanted to know at what stage in the sharing do you protect your deck, whether it's through a password protection, when do you do that?
So I know for me and I think it's different for everybody, and certainly depends on who you're sending the deck out to. For me, I just put in a copyright, and I wasn't really too concerned about protecting my deck. Obviously, this is going to be recorded and it's going to be public, so I'm pretty open about sharing my deck. But when I did get to the point where I was sending it out to production companies, and they were sending me these waiver forms where I basically had to sign a form saying, if they make a similar film, I can't sue them. That made me really nervous. So I actually copyrighted my deck or my treatment, which the treatment was the written portion of my deck. I don't know how much that really helps, but it certainly can't hurt. You can do it online for I think it's $50. So I did it then because I got to a point where it was getting to a lot of bigger companies, and I wanted to make sure if I was signing these waivers, I at least had something. But I think if you're just, maybe you're making your deck to send out to potential people who are going to be on your crew, you're looking for a producer, you're looking for an editor. I think at that point, you could just be putting in a copyright, just at the end. So it really depends on your comfort level and who you're sending it out to. And then jumping back to the other question about participants, we will get into this as I show my own deck. But I'd say it can be really simple. Again, you want people to kind of just glance at your deck and get a quick overview. So, maybe you want to put some headshots of them. Our film is a mix of animation and live action. So we actually do character studies, and we have illustrations of people. So we actually use the illustrations and the headshots, and then we put just a very short synopsis, or we call it a synopsis, but just a really short bio of each person and how it sort of relates to our story. But I think particularly for a supporting character, you don't need too much information. Certainly for your main participants, you should have a little bit more. But I think the key thing is to don't put in every participant. If you have 20 people in your film, really narrow it down to the main people you need to highlight. So I think the next part I was at was team bios. So you really want to highlight, the director and the producer, certainly, maybe the editor. Really depends on, again, what stage you're at and who you have on board. I would say you don't need to highlight every single person in your team. I know a film takes so many people to put it together, and every single person is important, but you will have a very long deck if you put in everybody. So I would really try to highlight the director and producer. Certainly if you have people who are, I don't know, maybe you have a celebrity executive producer, definitely put that in, particularly if you're, reaching out to networks and streamers and people who really are going to be drawn to that. If you have, I don't know, maybe an advisor who has 5 Oscar wins or something like that, definitely put in that kind of stuff, because people do want to see, they want to see you've created a team that can make this project happen, and that is going to bring it into being a reality. Particularly, I'd say if you are a first-time filmmaker, you really want to show that you have surrounded yourself with a lot of people who have done it before and who can really help bring it into the world. So try to keep these short and sweet, but you also want to really highlight people's achievements and who you have surrounding you. And then the next thing I'd say is a director statement. So this sort of leads back to what I was talking about with the one sheet, why this film, why is it urgent? I think these are questions you often see in grant applications, and these are questions that can all be answered in a director statement. If you don't have a strong director statement, you don't necessarily need to put it. But certainly if you have a really close tie to the community that you're filming, if there's if you're in the film, or if you have been a participant in that community that you are now recording, or your producer as, whoever it may be, you want to get a statement in there that says why you're choosing to make this film, why it's really important, and why you should be the one making the film. And this could be a producer statement instead of a director statement if maybe it's maybe the producer statement is stronger. I've also seen decks that have both. I would just make sure you keep it somewhat short if you're doing more than one. And then the last thing, this sounds so simple, but almost nobody puts it in when they give me text, your contact information. Make sure that people know how to get a hold of you. Even if you're protecting your deck, you want your deck to be forwarded, because again, you're often might be sending it to a gatekeeper, so you want them to forward it to the right people, and you want to make sure whoever is seeing this deck knows how to get in touch with you. I guess we'll show the trailer to my film before I get into my deck, so that you have some context of what the film is and what the film is about, and that way you can kind of see that. And then we'll jump into my deck. For my feature film. My film is not yet released. We are still sending it out to the world. We are in post-production, but we have gotten a really great response from the deck, and so I can kind of go over it and how we've hopefully incorporated all the things I've recommended doing, with an actual deck that you'll be able to look at.
I don't remember the actual accident. Mom, Dad, my sister Jen, and I were coming back from the beach. I'd been led to believe that it was a drunk driver that killed my mother. After all the years, I needed to move forward, to forgive the person responsible for the accident. But when I saw the police report, it was actually the beginning of a bigger journey. When my mom died, Jen was only months old, and I was 12. My connection to the Vietnamese side of our family ended. One day I was at work and I got a text message. It said, "Here's your sister's phone number." Having another sister, I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked.
Mấy Linh có nhiều câu hỏi cho cậu hai lắm mà xúc động quá không nói được đâu.
Hồi lúc mẹ chị đi á, là chị 6 tuổi. Nhưng mà chị chỉ viết nói ở dưới á, là mẹ ơi về cứu con đi mẹ về mới rước con đi mẹ đi.
Growing up in America, my dad, he was a great father when things were good. One day, he lost control of himself. And I knew, I gotta get out of there. But I regretted leaving Jen with him.
Growing up, my dad remarried and we moved down to Texas. Kind of thought that I had a sister, but we just didn't talk about it. My teacher saw my bruises and she said, "Jenny, what happened?" I would have done anything to hide the bruises so that I wouldn't have been taken away. How can you leave a child behind in Vietnam, and then with my sister, how can you leave a child in Virginia, and then how can you leave a child in Texas?
When you've gone through similar trauma, being in foster care, being a victim of abuse, words don't actually matter. Now, it's like putting a puzzle together. All the different stories I'd been told about our family, None of those are true.
So now I'll just kind of show you, I guess, how everything we've already talked about is implemented. And again, feel free to chime in with questions. So this is just the first page, the cover. Really what I want to get across is that it's a feature film. And in our case, it is mixed media, where we do have a blend of animation and live action and archival materials and interviews, talking head interviews and stuff. So I do like to let people know that, but I think as long as you get across that, it's a feature or a short or a series, that is a key thing. Again, as we had talked about earlier, you want to have a quick, easy log line. The image you see here is Juliet. We have like 3 main characters, but she is our main character. So we want to highlight her in the beginning. And these are what I sort of call filler pages. Particularly, I know we have a very hard story, but very kind of traumatic story. But with any film, even if it's like a comedy, the deck can be very dense and it can have a lot of information in it. So you want to sort of break it up and have these breathing room pages. So I like to put in some pages throughout the deck that either is just a full page image, or it's an image with a quote, or something that kind of is just big and bold and can capture your attention, but also give breathing room and a little bit of space in between some of the heavier content. Here we have the synopsis. We have a very long synopsis, and it was kind of hard for us to get it down to 1 page, but I would really recommend doing 1 page if you can. I have worked on decks that have, maybe 2 pages, but you don't want to do like the full 3 or 4 pages you might submit in like a grant application. Now, this is very unique to our deck. I haven't done this for other people's decks before, but I think, you have to customize the deck based on what is needed for your particular film. In our case, it's a family story. It's a very complicated story, and it's very easy for people to get confused on who's who, particularly, if they're only looking at like a 3-minute trailer and they're reading a quick synopsis. So we found that having a way to show people in just a very easy, illustrated way really helps people understand who the main characters are and what their relationships are to each other. This is not necessarily something you need to put in your deck, but if you happen to have a story that kind of has some of the same complexities as ours does, it is just one way to illustrate that. And I think this page is more an example of making something unique to your particular film and the needs of your particular film. Again, this is just a breathing room. We want to show images. This also shows that we're using archival material and personal archival material, so that you have a sense of what, you've seen some of our illustrations already, but you've seen some of our photos. So now we want to make sure you're seeing some of the other aspects of the artistic approaches that we're using. And I think a key point for us is that if we tell people we're using all these different types of medium, they're like, oh, how is it going to blend together? Isn't it going to feel disjointed? When I made this deck, I wanted to make it clear it's not going to be disjointed, and these things are going to blend really well. And so for us, that was also a key reason for using some of these images. But depending on what you're using, you may want something different. I know somebody asked earlier about your participants. So for ours, we do have a lot of people involved. So these are sort of the primary characters, our main film participants. Juliet is our main character, with Jen and her younger sister Jen and her older sister Hong being also primary characters, but the entire film is being told through Juliet's eyes. So we are trying to make that clear to avoid confusion, and so this is kind of how we've done that. We also chose to do illustrations and photos of the people because of the unique style of our film. But certainly, if you're not doing an animated film, I think just having some photos or screenshots from your film that show who's who, I think can be really helpful. We've added supporting characters because we had so many characters, and because this is a family story and it is about really complex relationships. So we have to sort of include some of these people in our pitches and when we're talking about the film, even if we're not talking about them, a lot. But yeah, so this is an example of supporting characters. And then again, more breathing room, showing the sisters that are coming together. And for us, it's really important to sort of balance out the trauma with the healing. And so some of these images allow us to do that. And then this is a little bit of the artistic approach that I've been talking about. we're using older images, we're using animation, we're going to be layering newspaper articles with illustrations. We're going to be using photos, which you're going to see on the next few pages. So that's kind of what we wanted to do, is to show what our particular approach is. And this is going to vary, drastically depending on, what your film is and how you are, how your approach is.
Question in the chat about where you put the historical context or social context and background of the film. And I see that you mentioned the relationship between the US and Vietnam on the slide. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. In our particular deck, I feel like we have it sort of sprinkled throughout. So just like give a little bit of context to this deck. The three sisters were, well, the first two, the eldest and the middle one, were split up initially at the end of the Vietnam War. So at the fall of Saigon, the father was a American soldier. The mom's a Vietnamese woman, and so when they came to America, they were not allowed to bring the elder sister, whose name is Hong, because she had a different father. We did not know this at the time, but she had a different father, so she did not have ties to America. So this is kind of the first point when their family is split up. So for us, this historical context is really important. Even though this isn't a film about the Vietnam War, it really looks at 50 years worth of family separation and just historical and intergenerational trauma that stems from that point in time. But depending on funding, we are trying to release this film in time for the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, which is in April 2025. So for us, the historical context is really important. It is sort of in the email that I send out when I'm sending out the pitch deck. It is in the pitch when I'm verbally talking about it. And you'll just find it sprinkled throughout our deck. The ties to Vietnam are mentioned in our synopsis. When we're talking about the project timeline, the ties there are mentioned again. I don't think you necessarily have to have a separate page about it, but if you do have something where it is a really strong, historical context and people may not know it, particularly like if we were to be doing something much more focused on the Vietnam War, and there's a younger generation now who, we're not alive for it, you may want to have a page for historical context. For us, it's sort of the backdrop to the film, so we just have it sprinkled throughout. So we actually have a work sample here, which is actually not something I would normally recommend. I recommend, if you're going to have anything, do a single scene or do a trailer, because you want to keep people just don't have a lot of attention span, and you want to keep things short and sweet. I have sort of gone against my own advice. So when we were putting this deck together, we did not have a trailer that was finished yet. And so I had put in a 15-minute work sample as what was supposed to be a placeholder. I was actually really surprised that when we were sending the deck out, almost everybody we send it out to watched the 15-minute sample, which I was, like I said, very surprised by. So once we did have a trailer, I decided to keep this in, and then I send out a trailer sort of in the initial email when I'm sending out the deck. And then if people want to watch it, they have access to it, but they certainly don't have to. I've done that because we have actually had a really great response rate and most people have watched it. So I wouldn't say don't do it. But again, I was really surprised by that. And I would normally say short and sweet is better. So this is kind of, I'll leave it up to you. But I do think if you have something edited and you feel like it's strong enough to show at this point, do put a link to it. One thing I would caution you is if you're going to use like a QR code or something like an embedded link, like where we say click here, check it, make sure it works, and make it so it's easily accessible. So I don't know, if somebody is looking on their phone and they see a QR code and now they're on their phone and they can't actually like use the QR code, so they have to wait until later. So make sure you have multiple ways to access this link and make sure you test it to make sure it works. So we have the click here, but we also have the Vimeo link. So if the click here is not working for somebody can just copy and paste that. And like, we know that there's a backup and that there is a way for people to access it. So definitely just kind of a technicality, but it's something that I feel like often gets overlooked.
Thank you. And so this brings me to the question. So someone asked, do you recommend putting a trailer page after the visuals and or comparables, but before the audience page? That means having it midway in the deck as opposed to having the trailer at the very end.
I think it is going to depend on your deck and what you, what you have in it. I will say I would keep in mind somebody might not make it to the end. So, you don't necessarily want it up front because you may want people to have some context, certainly like the log line and a little bit of information about the film. But I would just, caution that somebody might not make it to the end of the deck. So having it earlier is not necessarily a bad thing. I would make sure there is some context though, so that you are not, you're not necessarily putting it on page 1 where somebody has no information yet. And so now we get a little bit more into audience and impact and distribution and like that section of the deck. And those things I recommend putting towards the end, because you first want people to, the thing that's going to connect people is the story, the visuals. So that's really what you want to put up front. And with that in mind, like certainly if you have a trailer where people are going to connect to it, getting that in front of the audience can be a really good thing. Because now when you're getting to this sort of back end stuff, it's a little bit more of the logistics. It's the audience and the bios and kind of all the stuff that, that will make your film hopefully, get out there into the world. So for us, we have sort of a complicated audience where I work, I have been working in the child welfare world for very long time. I'm also an animator, and I also sort of have a large network of people in the foster care industry because I worked in that world for such a long time. So for us, one part of our audience is getting social workers and people who are working in child abuse and foster care, because that is a large aspect of sort of the backstory of our film. There is sort of more the currently unfolding story of our film, which deals a lot more with Asian American identity and Asian, the sisters, 2 sisters live in America and then they go to Vietnam to meet their 3rd sister. So there is a lot of just the idea of reconnecting to your heritage and your roots. There is sort of all 3 sisters, when they connect, unfortunately realize with the help of a translator who's helping them communicate that they have had similar backstories of physical and sexual abuse and some child labor. So there is this really like difficult ongoing story that we're looking at following their path towards healing. So for that aspect, we are targeting Asian American communities. We're targeting communities that really focus on breaking the culture of silence in the Asian American community around talking about these things. So we do sort of have a two-tiered impact campaign, distribution, audience. We do have different tiers. So I think ours is a little bit complicated in that sense. But so using the audience section, the impact section, and distribution, we are sort of trying to show how we would focus on these different tiers. I do think you can, if yours is simpler, you can kind of simplify it a little bit and maybe put this into 1 page. For the project status and timeline, this might be 1 line that you have at the end and you don't need an entire page for it. Certainly if you're, whatever, maybe you're in development and you don't know your timeline yet, maybe it's something as simple as, we're going to be done, in 2024 in time for the Olympics or some big event or something like that. If you want to put in a more detailed timeline, I would just say, make sure you're keeping it up to date. If somebody comes across your, timeline and it says film premieres in 2017 and you're sending it out in 2023, that's going to look bad and it's going to look like you're not keeping this up to date and they're not getting the most current information. How detailed you're going to make this, I would say, depends on who you're sending it out to. Do the people you're sending it out to need to know this information? If it's an investor, are they going to want to know when is this going to get out? If it's a distributor, if it's a streamer, a lot of them might be looking to fill sort of a certain gap in a certain timeline. So I think this information is helpful to people, but you can be as detailed or not as detailed depending on your own project. And now for us, we're getting into distribution here. This, at the point that we've made this deck, is a little bit aspirational. Obviously, we don't know if we're going to get a theatrical distribution. You don't necessarily know what deals you're going to have in place. We are in, I'll say, in the works of working on a public broadcast deal. Certainly, if that goes through, then we will be updating this to have some of it will still be aspirational in terms of theatrical distribution and stuff, but we'll be able to put something much more concrete. So I would say one thing to be careful of is making it clear kind of what's aspirational versus what's something you have in place. You don't want it to seem confusing. Like if you, I don't know, maybe if you're pitching to a celebrity or something, but you don't have them in place, you don't want to put their face all over it, and then people think you have somebody in that you don't. Similarly, you don't want it to make it sound like you already have a Netflix deal if you don't. But if you're just saying like, these are all the things we want to do, I think that's fine. You just have to make it clear that it's not, you're not sort of lying about anything. And then we get into bios. We have, I believe it's 2 pages of bios. If you can fit it all into one, great. If you need 2 pages, go for it. I would try to avoid doing, like 4 or 5 pages of bios. But I think the key thing, as I mentioned earlier, is you want to make sure you get your director, producer in there. If you have, again, people with like amazing bios, if you have celebrities, any of that stuff, definitely add them in. But don't put your entire team on there, even though every single member is super important. And then the director statement, for me, this was a really important thing because it showed that I have ties to the community, having worked in the child welfare world for a really long time, being a South Asian woman myself. We actually have we have a number of people in our film team that are Vietnamese or a part of that community. So if I did want to add another page, I would probably add a producer statement, as my co-producer is Vietnamese. So you sort of have to balance out like what the length of your deck versus what you want to be able to put in. And with that in mind, I would say like I recommend making this master deck that has everything, but you don't necessarily need to send every page out to everybody. So in our case, this is sort of our master deck. But if we're going to send something out to the Vietnamese American community, I will probably put in a producer statement from my producer who is from that community. If we're going to send something out to the foster care community, I may make an alternate version of this deck that is going to be a little less focused on the Asian American impact producing stuff that we're doing, and a little bit more focused on the foster care work that we're doing and the child welfare and family separation aspect. So like we do have multiple aspects, and it's very hard to get them into one deck. So this is sort of our generic deck that gets that out to everybody. But I know we're getting ready to start looking for impact partners, and so we will be making like one deck for the foster care community specifically, another one for a different community. And so I would say just keep in mind that one deck does not necessarily like fit everything, and that you will want to customize things depending on who you're sending it out to.
Someone asked, if you had the visuals like specifically made for the deck, or did you pull it from the film? So I'll let you start off on that first.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we were in a bit of an unusual spot with the film in that this project is 10 years in the making, very ready for it to be done. But so by the time I made the deck, it was probably, I don't know, like maybe 7 years or something, 8 years in the making. So I had already kind of made mood boards. We had already been working with an illustrator to do character designs. And I come from a background of being a designer and animator, and I do make like lookbooks and mood boards and stuff for a living. So I had already done a lot of that legwork in terms of the visual style. So for me, I think we came from maybe an unusual spot where we really had the visual style already very much locked in, because we had been working on this film on and off, but still for so many years. The story kept evolving, which is why it like wasn't getting anywhere. But I think most people, when they come to me wanting to make a deck, unless they're at a point where they're looking for kind of finishing funds or distribution, they're coming on in an earlier stage and they don't necessarily have that. If that is the case for you, when you're sort of budgeting for making a deck, I think you need to budget for sort of doing that mood board and that kind of look and feel of your film, because you're going to need that to create the deck. So kind of that's going to be part of your process of creating the deck. You're going to be figuring out what is the look and feel of your film. And maybe you're doing that with stock images, like maybe you haven't shot anything yet, and that's okay. It's okay to be using stock images, or Google images or whatever. It's private, but it really is just going to depend on where you are in terms of your film and when you're wanting to do the deck. Obviously, if you're in development, you're just not going to be at the stage that we were at.
Great. And since you mentioned budgeting for the visuals of the deck, I wanted to also throw in another question. Do you have a budget page on the deck?
I get this question a lot. So in my opinion, I don't like showing financials. I like to keep the money stuff for like the conversation, especially because not everybody needs to know budget. If you're sending this out to an investor, maybe they want to know it. But if you're sending this out to, I don't know, a potential producer or executive producer or editor, they don't necessarily need to know all the details of your budget. It could certainly be a slide that you pop in for very specific people that you are sending it to, because as I mentioned, it's good to have a master deck and then customize it. But I like to sort of keep the money talk separate and to not have that information in your deck. If you do decide to keep it in your deck, I would just be careful about keeping it up to date, because I know that stuff can always be changing. And so you want to make sure that you're kind of up to date with that, much like you would be with the timeline. So again, making sure you have your contact information. I don't necessarily think you necessarily need to have the big whole long block of text we had. Again, we started with just a copyright, and then as we were pitching it to bigger places, we decided to just be a little bit more cautious. But that's very much up to you whether you want to do, we've already talked about the various ways of protecting your deck. But definitely, I think the main thing you want to have on that end slide is how can people get in touch with you. So I'm only showing my own work just for NDAs and, protecting people's privacy, especially with films that are not, not necessarily out in the world. So I actually haven't made a one sheet for my own films when a film was still in production or in development. I have mostly made one sheets when the film is about to get out there into the world. It's been for educational distribution, impact, sponsorship. So I won't have an example of a film that is in production. But I do think a lot of what I'm about to show you can apply in many different scenarios. You just kind of have to alter, what your text is going to be saying. So this particular one sheet, which is technically two sheets, just show you. So these are the two sheets. This is actually a little bit different in that this is for a film that we actually have that's about to be premiering on PBS next month. So for us, the reason I had made this one sheet was because for those of you familiar with PBS, they have underwriting. It's when they say like, this film is sponsored by, and there's like some logos and stuff. So we were looking for a sponsorship. So we made this particular one sheet when the film was done, but not released, in order to be able to try to get sponsorship opportunities. I do think kind of all the elements we have in here are fairly similar to what you would have in one that was for a film that was still in production, where you might be looking for, instead of sponsorship for, a finished film, you might be looking for sponsorship for a film that is currently in production and you're looking for finishing funds. But the key thing that I want to include, the title of the film, sort of the log line, the synopsis. For me, the about the filmmaker, which is me, was really the who, what, when, where, why kind of stuff. The why this film, why me, because this film is, again, also about the foster care. These all started as part of a series and then kind of branched out into their own individual projects. But again, so this is saying that I work in the foster care world. I have years and years of experience with it. So hoping to kind of gain people's trust in, why I'm the filmmaker and why I'm making this, and that you would kind of want to support this project. On this page, I know we already talked a little bit about quotes. I think this is a good example of when you don't have a review yet, right? Our film has not been released out into the world. But this particular film is a compilation of several short films that we had made that had been released out into the world. I didn't feel comfortable taking a review because the review would be for a specific short film, and this is a compilation that's been re-edited. So I wasn't sure what to do for, a quote, but we had done a lot of impact producing already with the two short films. And so we had sort of shown those individually. And so I did feel comfortable using those quotes because those whole films these films were going to be in the compilation. So for me, because we were sending this particular one sheet out very much to the social work and foster care world and child welfare world. We weren't sending this out to corporate brands for sponsorship. So I really wanted the quotes to connect with our audience. And so we knew quotes coming from foster parents or potential foster parents would really connect with the people that we were trying to reach. And then if you look at the text on this page, in this case, it's a little bit more about the sponsorship opportunity, but really what you're saying is sort of what your ask is and what your like call to action is. Why are you sending them this one sheet? You know, what is it that you want? And so that's kind of the idea behind making this is who, what, when, where, why, what's the film about, and like, why are you making it? Why are you making it? And why are you making it now? And how is it being supported? Or, you know, you want to really show that the film already has some support behind it. And then of course your contact information. And if you do have social media already set up, and especially if you have a good following, you know, people want to invest in films that have an audience already. So definitely show that. And I'd also say if you are at an earlier stage, but you are a filmmaker who has a good track record, you know, maybe the quote's about you instead of the film, if you don't have any quotes about the film yet. And maybe it's about your track record or your ability to make films that kind of get out there and do really well or connect with a particular community. So this is a fully animated doc, again, part of this foster care series that I've been working on. So this one was more for educational outreach and impact. I believe when we had made this, we were just kind of starting to submit to like film festivals, and the film was done, but had not been released yet. But we had gotten some reviews in preparation for our premiere. So we do have like we do have a quote on there from a review. But again, it's kind of the same idea. This is a one sheet that's actually one sheet, not one sheet front and back. So just showing you how you can kind of do something in a much even more concise way. And again, it is a little different, but still the idea is at the bottom, you've got your links, you've got your call to action, and you've got kind of the basics, who, what, when, where, why.
Hi, thanks so much. This was so useful. I was super curious about what are the next steps after a pitch deck. You make the most beautiful deck in the world and you get a meeting. What sort of things are folks wanting to see in terms of follow-up material for an in-person meeting? And what is sort of the process after you get feedback or someone reaches out about a meeting after you submit the pitch deck?
I mean, first of all, congrats. If you're at a point where you're getting a meeting, your deck has sort of done its job, right? That is the purpose of the deck. So that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on who the meeting is with. You know, if it's a corporation versus if it's a production company versus if it's like maybe a potential executive producer or a producer, everybody is going to be wanting different things. So it very much is going to depend on who you are reaching out to. I'd say it's also going to depend on what stage, and I know I keep saying that, but it's also going to depend on what stage you are at and what you have submitted with the deck. So for example, if you have submitted only the deck and you haven't shown any work, or maybe you've shown a trailer, maybe somebody wants to see, you know, a 15-minute sample, or they want to see a rough cut if you're at that stage. So it could be questions like that. I have had, I feel like almost everybody we've submitted this deck to has given us a meeting, which has been really, really great. But I mean, in quite honesty, like a lot of people will give the meeting saying like, we aren't able to take this film on. We just love the deck and we want to support you in any way we can. So we just want to have a conversation. So it could be something like that, where you might just be getting a conversation and maybe you're asking, who do they know? Like, who do they know who can, who maybe does have the resources or does have, you know, a spot in their slate or whatever to get you to the next step that you need. So just taking the meeting to be able to get to that next level, I'd say, sort of have it in your back pocket what you are looking for and what your needs are. Because if the person can't help you, but they still want to have a conversation with you, it does mean they want to help you in some way. So just like getting that meeting, I think, and being able to give them whatever they can. And I have had a lot of people be like, oh, you know, we only come on in the development phase and you're in post-production. What's your next project? So, and my answer is normally like, I've been working on this for 10 years. I don't know, but you can't say that. So I'd say also just have it in your back pocket to be able to answer that question.
Are there scenarios where you've shown your deck in person? I know that that's kind of like now like a very antiquated idea. But do you ever have like talking points to go with the deck, or is it kind of self-explanatory?
Yeah, so I'd say it's a slightly different style of deck if you are kind of pitching in person and you're going to be showing it like more like a PowerPoint alongside stuff. we were kind of getting to the point of needing a deck in 2020. So we really didn't have the need to show this in person because pretty much everything has been virtual and over Zoom. So we have been just, honestly, even that, we haven't even been showing it like on Zoom. We've been sending it out, kind of like what we just talked about a minute ago with Raphael. We've been sending it out in an email and then just using it to get a meeting with people. But I would say if you are trying to pitch in person, then you want your deck to not have so much text. You want it to really just be the talking points that you're going to have and then really just be about the visuals.
From memory, I'll say, like, do you have any suggestions for when you're creating a pitch deck specifically for PBS? And I also just want to address the fact that there was a question about pitching in general to PBS, and that's not within the scope of this event, so we won't take on that question. But if you have any tips on like designing a deck for PBS in your experience, what do they like seeing? What elements should it include?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody kind of likes seeing the same stuff. It's more just a question of, I think PBS has a very different target audience necessarily than like Netflix and Apple and, Hulu. So I think like HBO and all of those kind of companies, they are really going to want like sort of the commercial appeal. They want the celebrities, they want true crime, they kind of have a list of what they want, particularly if it's in originals versus acquisitions. Whereas I think PBS, I think we all sort of know like the PBS style of like kind of these very personal stories, and they can be a little bit more educational. So I think a lot of people I know, when we were trying to originally pitch our film as being for both audiences, we did get some pushback on that. That, oh no, they're two different audiences. And so we have had to figure out a way to sort of pitch to both. But I think it's just really, it's the same thing. It's just more that if you're going for like a streamer, you really have to push the commercial side of it.
Someone asked, do you have any resources for finding animators who work in documentary? I will just plug in and say Yasmin's an animator, so keep that in mind, but I'll let you go ahead and answer that.
I would say if you're looking for an animator, the big thing is what style you're looking for. There's a lot of different styles of animation. Our film incorporates 4 different styles. So like I am one of the animators working in one style, but I don't work in the other 3 styles. So like we have a whole team of people, working together to kind of create what the 4 different styles of animation that are then being weaved together, hopefully seamlessly. So I think a big thing is when you're looking for animators is to know what style, and then that'll kind of help you figure out where you can find an animator. But there are also a lot of like online groups. Animation is one for animators, kind of from around the world, female identifying animators. And for ours, we looked at Asian Americans in animation because we were kind of looking for that style. There's a lot more resources. I just kind of have to think of them, but as I think of them, I can put them in the chat.
Hi, I had a really quick question, I think, and thank you. This has been so great. But I just wanted to see if you could say, do you have thoughts on like if your deck is built on a website and you're sharing a link instead of a PDF, or is it really just best as a PDF attachment?
You can do a website. I mean, the nice part about a website is that it's always evolving, so it's easy to update and somebody is not maybe downloading something that has like old information. I will say sometimes people want something downloadable. So if you do a website, you may also want something that people can, maybe put in a folder on their desktop and archive and stuff like that. So I would say just make sure you have something that even if it's like a one sheet that they can download as a PDF, and maybe that's just like embedded on your website. The way I usually send out ours is I do it as a Google Drive link. That way they have the option to download it, but if they don't download it and maybe they come back to it in 3 months, then they're going to see my latest one because we do tend to update it. Not super frequently, but if we bring on board somebody, new to our team, we might add in their bio. Certainly if we like confirm our distribution deal, we're going to update a lot of like the distribution stuff. So we are always updating it. So like I like to have it in a form that they can kind of go to a link where they can get up-to-date information if they want.
So with that, Yasmin, thank you so much for this great presentation, and have a great evening, everyone.